We're just going to wait a few minutes as people begin to enter. And while you're joining us, please use the chat function to say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat. And you could tell us your name and maybe what county you're either planning on voting in or what county you have already voted in if you've already done so we can see the geographic power of our votes. Thank you all so much for joining us. We've got a great session today with some wonderful speakers, and we're just going to give everybody a chance to join in. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves and tell us what county you'll be voting in, or if you've already voted, where you're voting, where you voted. Welcome, folks. We're just going to give people a few minutes to join us. I see Carol Banker. Are you trying to show us your map? Oh, your ballot. Okay, very nice. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And especially to our speakers who I know are doing such important work, for taking time out of your schedules to be part of today's program. And if you haven't already done so, please use the chat function to introduce yourselves, tell us what county you'll be voting in or where you've already voted. And you can also use the chat function during the course of the call to ask questions or make comments. I think we're all probably very familiar with how Zoom works and how we can use the chat by now. So we'll just give it a few more minutes. And while we're waiting, I'll just remind folks that this is, the Women's Foundation California is a public foundation, and we're really proud to endorse ballot measures that we believe benefit our communities and advance our mission. And that we just want to underscore that as a public foundation, a public charity, we don't oppose or support any political party or candidate for public office. I know you're all familiar with that, but we just wanted to underscore that, and we'll remind you throughout the call. So we've got 27 participants. I know we had about almost 70 RSVPs, so we'll just maybe give it a few more minutes, knowing that things come up for folks and maybe not everybody who has RSVP'd will be able to join. I see Jay from LA voted yesterday. That's wonderful. Carol Banker's got her ballot that she just showed us. And if others of you haven't introduced yourselves yet, please do so in the chat. And perhaps, given that time is ticking along, we can get started, but I will, before we do that, is there anything Stephanie or Nina you want to say before I kick things off?
I think we're set on my end.
Okay, so we've got 27 folks here. We're so happy to welcome you all today to this wonderful program about a feminist guide to California's propositions. If you haven't already introduced yourself, please use the chat to introduce yourselves. You'll see my colleague Kamika has just put a reminder that this is a nonpartisan call. We're very fortunate to have some wonderful experts with us today to tell us about a feminist guide to California's propositions. So I want to again thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to bring this program to you. This year we expanded our Women's Policy Institute team, and so we're excited to extend our policy advocacy work to include state ballot measure endorsements and voter education in this really critical and unprecedented year. We're joined by Women's Policy Institute alums and Women's Foundation California grant partners who have offered to share their time and, most importantly, their expertise with us. So today we'll hear briefly about each proposition, and then we're going to move into breakout groups for a deeper discussion. We'll come back after the breakout groups and share some key takeaways from each of our discussions, and we'll also have time for Q&A, and I really encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat so that we can capture them and be sure to address them. So with that, my job is really a simple one and a very joyous one, because I get to introduce you to one of our resident experts, our Director of Policy Programs at Women's Foundation California, Marisol Franco, who will tell you more about our guide and today's speaker. So with that, Marisol, I kick it off to you.
Thank you, Serena. This is awesome to see all of your faces. As Serena said, this is such a critical year, not only nationally, so that is intense, but also at the state and local level. And at the state level, we have a number of critical ballot initiatives here in California. So for our feminist guide to the propositions, we chose to weigh in on those that most closely align with our mission, that have explicit racial, economic, and gender justice implications, and which our community of grant partners and WPI alums are actively working on. At Women's Foundation California, we believe that those closest to the problems are also best positioned to design solutions. So we are committed to learning from and elevating the voices of community leaders, which is why we're really excited to have this forum today where we bring together our community leaders to talk about these propositions. So for Proposition 15, our discussion will be led by Clarissa Brassard, Executive Director of Parent Voices Oakland, and Kayla Kitson, Policy Analyst with the nonpartisan California Budget and Policy Center. Clarissa is an advocate and movement builder who has been honored for her work with the Gloria Steinem Women of Vision Award, East Bay Women's Political Alliance's Advocate of the Year, and First Five of Alameda County Parent of the Year Award. She's also an alum of the Women's Policy Institute. Kayla is an expert in tax policy analysis, super exciting. And in addition to knowing California landscape, most recently worked with the Americans for Tax Fairness in Washington, D.C. We're also excited that Jamise Myers, Political Director for Prop 15, will be joining us today, and Jamise will also be available to answer any questions specifically around Prop 15. Now, leading the Prop 16 discussion will be Leanne Chun, Executive Director of My Girls in Action, as well as Jesse Ryan, Executive Vice President of Campaign for College Opportunity. Leanne is a 1.5 generation refugee from Cambodia who started her career as a youth organizer. In 2014, she was appointed to President Obama's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We are also honored to have WPI alum Jesse Ryan, in addition to her work with the Campaign for College Opportunity to expand access to college for California students. Jesse serves on the Sacramento City Unified School District Board. And then we have our Prop 17 discussion, which will be led by Shay Franco-Clausen, Director of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, as well as Maya Ingram, Legislative Attorney at the ACLU of California, Center for Policy and Advocacy. So I think I got that mixed up, Center for Advocacy and Policy. So Shay is a lifelong advocate and organizer and is currently serving her 5th year on the Santa Clara County Commission on the Status of Women, to which she was elected chair in 2017. Maya's work with the ACLU focuses on legislation and budget advocacy relating to immigrants' rights, civic engagement, voting rights, reproductive rights, and economic justice. She also serves with me on the California Coalition for Reproductive Freedoms Executive Committee and has supported many, many WPI teams throughout the year. With that, I'd now like to offer callers a brief introduction to each proposition. Maybe Clarissa can start us off. Will you share with us just a basic intro on Prop 15?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Clarissa Dafford, as Marisol had mentioned, with Parent Voices Oakland. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm always excited to be in space with my Women's Foundation and Women's Policy Institute family. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this initiative and also how this initiative impacts the base that I organize and work with every day, and myself as a parent, a mother, a Black woman in this community and in California. So I'm excited to share more information about Prop 15 with my friend and colleague, Janice Myers. So I also want to shout out Janice Myers, who's doing the incredible work of being political director for the entire state. And I'm so proud. I could cry right now. This campaign is a tremendous milestone and opportunity for our movement to see a seismic change in revenue and the way that we're able to fund our public infrastructure. Many organizations and activists have been working for decades to reform parts of the conservative Prop 13 policy of 1978, which provided devastating loopholes to corporations in our tax code, and has essentially gutted our school systems and the way that we're able to deliver local services. Over the past 40 years, since 1978, homeowners have paid more and more of their fair share of property taxes, which is imbalanced our municipal budgets, right? And made it very difficult, especially those of us who've done budget advocacy work at the state and local level. We know that we are fighting for very, very small slices of the pie. And there's a really clear reason for that. Not everyone is paying their fair share. So this would require that the corporations, that we stop this legacy of corporations paying less and less every year, where our systems are being starved, and communities, particularly women, communities of color, young people, are not receiving at the education, healthcare, and services that they deserve. And while we're also seeing an increase, and have been seeing an increase in our prison population and in incarceration, right? As poverty and systemic racism and institutional racism increase and deepen. So we simply can't afford corporate tax loopholes at the expense of our essential workers and the most critical services in schools. And I'll talk a little bit about what Prop 15 specifically does. The first thing, as I mentioned, it closes corporate loopholes and ensures that, excuse me, whoops, my computer just did something. Okay. Oh, goodness. So Prop 15 closes corporate loopholes. And I'm going to talk in a moment a little bit about, specifically what that looks like in the community. But it cuts small business taxes, reclaims billions every year. I mean, billions of dollars to invest in our schools and local communities. It does exempt homeowners and renters, no matter what folks have heard, homeowners, renters, small businesses, and agricultural land, so they can continue to be protected by Prop 13. And Prop 15, again, ensures that corporations, large corporations, are not being exempt from paying taxes and transferring that burden onto homeowners and working class people. It also prioritizes transparency and accountability, which is incredibly important, especially in this moment of incredible change, in this moment of COVID, in this moment of upheaval in a lot of our communities. There's a way for us to practice democracy and really ensure that funds are actually being spent in the community and managed well. I'll stop there. If there's anything you want to add, Janice, that I might have missed or that you'd like to throw in there.
Clarissa, whoops, there we go. I think you covered most of it, Clarissa. The only thing that I would add is that a recent study shows that 92% of the new revenue from Prop 15 comes from 10%, the top 10% of commercial properties in California. So we really are talking about closing loopholes that a very small, fraction of large, long-standing corporations have been taking advantage of in order to ensure that we all have the resources that we need, as Clarissa mentioned. And just so folks know, this might be obvious, but 40% of the funding goes directly to school districts using the local control funding formula, which is an equity formula that ensures districts who need it the most get the funding. And then 60% goes to our local governments. By that, I mean our cities, our county general fund, and our special districts like fire districts, water districts, more important than ever. And that goes directly to those funds, to those entities as unrestricted funds that can be used for things that we need. And that includes public health clinics, fire protection, and all the things that have cropped up this year.
Thank you both. So moving on to Prop 16, Leanne, could you tell us a little bit about that proposition, please?
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. Leanne Chen with Kamai Girls in Action. Hello from Long Beach. I'm excited to be here today with Jesse to talk to you all about the importance of Prop 16. And also just shout out to everyone who's hanging in there in this unrelenting year and continuing to move very important work in our community. And it's just so lovely to see all the beautiful women here with us today. I've been actually thinking a lot about Prop 16 because it brings me back to my childhood and back to like memories of growing up in Oakland. And it reminds me about the context of refugee resettlement from my family and what I experienced when we resettled in East Oakland in the mid-'80s. Like many Southeast Asian refugees, we were resettled in impoverished urban neighborhoods and in Black and Brown communities that have historically been disinvested in and with fragile infrastructure. I remember the housing project that I grew up in and the constant police sirens. The legacy of the genocidal horror of the Khmer Rouge was also transported into resettled communities like Oakland, like Long Beach, manifesting in higher level of violence. And there were many levels of violence, for low-income community, violence of poverty, violence of attending poorly resourced school, violence of living in heavily policed neighborhoods. And communities of color have historically lived within these contexts and compounding trauma. And I'm remembering a lot of these memories because I remember a lot of friends and family just struggling with PTSD, numbing themselves with alcohol and drugs and getting caught up in the pipeline from trauma to prison, peers at school getting caught up in the pipeline from schools to prison. And as a young person growing up in Oakland in the mid-'90s, I saw how systemic and institutional racism impacted my community, my neighborhood, my schools, how that impacted my friends and families. And, I was trying to understand all these dynamics as a teenager. And so I also became really active in my community. I joined a youth organization and learned about organizing. So when I was 16, I volunteered for the No on 209 campaign. I wanted so bad with every fiber of my being for our state to not ban affirmative action because racism and discrimination was already so bad for low-income communities of color and in the community that I grew up in. I remember waking up early every Saturday morning for over a month to door knock and to do lit drop. And at that age, I was not old enough to vote, but I told all of my neighbors how important it was for them to show up and vote so that we can continue to fight for racial and gender justice and to support the younger generation to grow up in a more fair and equitable society. But sadly, we lost. Many of us felt really crushed. And since then, we've been told that we can't do anything about racial disparity because of Prop 209. And California is only one of 9 states that bans affirmative action. And so, in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, they document the relationship between the reduction of education and employment opportunities to the increase of crime rates and thus incarceration rates. And the passage of 209 in 96 actually aided in the reinforcement of the school to prison pipeline, and prison spending had continued to grow. So that's part of the reason why I've been thinking a lot about Prop 16, because Prop 16 is so important right now. Prop 16 is a constitutional amendment repealing 209. And we have the opportunity this election cycle to reverse the decision and to reinstate affirmative action, to put back in place policies that could positively support members of disadvantaged and underrepresented groups that have historically suffered from racism and discrimination in our state. And Prop 16 specifically seek to eliminate discrimination in education and employment, and to be able to reapply an equitable lens in how communities interact with the state and with our various institutions. That would be really, really important, because Prop 16 will also promote the equal opportunity for women and for people of color. And what COVID-19 actually had exposed to the mainstream, that's something many of us have already known for a long time, is that institutional and structural inequalities disproportionately impact Black communities, Indigenous community, Brown communities, and low-income communities of color. So what this moment is showing us is that really there's no going back, because it didn't work. And it left so many of our community members vulnerable to the pandemic, to systemic inequality. And and for me, COVID-19 also reviewed the underlying illness of our society. We are in a moment of both national and local reckoning with racism. And this moment requires all of us to really understand the importance, how important it is that we need to address the structural and systemic inequality with the structural and systemic response. And Prop 16 could help us on this path. And all of our vote really matters, every single one of us, to be able to move a yes vote on Prop 16 this fall. And Jesse and I will look forward to having a deeper discussion in our breakout group. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for sharing, how the personal and political are the same. So in order to move us along, I'll ask Maya to share with us a little bit about Prop 17.
So Prop 17 is a very straightforward measure. It amends our state constitution to re-enfranchise Californians who have finished their prison term. Prop 17 is a recognition that our democracy is more fair and inclusive when everyone is a part of it. If passed, Prop 17 would actually join California with a third of the country, 19 states, and the District of Columbia that already gives this portion of our community the right to vote. And I think it's important to understand, how did we get to this current state of law? So disenfranchising people with felony convictions has direct ties to the racially discriminatory Jim Crow laws that came out of slavery and Reconstruction. And they were adopted with the very express purpose of excluding Black and Brown people from having a say at the ballot box. And that is the impact that they still have today. California often likes to think that we do better on these issues, but we have our own role in this legacy. So California refused to ratify the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution. This is the amendment that prohibits discrimination in voting laws on the basis of race until 1962. So that's in our lifetimes and our parents' lifetimes that California got around to ratifying that important protection. And we actually had permanent lifetime felony disenfranchisement in our very first constitution. It was adopted when California became a state in 1849. The Democratic Party was the majority party at that time, and if you look at their state resolutions, it is not surprising why California rejected ratification of the 15th Amendment. So in their state resolutions from 1867, they say that they believe it is impractical to maintain Republican institutions if you give suffrage to Black community members, Chinese, and Indian community members. And that, quote, that the doctrines avowed by the radical leaders of indiscriminate suffrage, regardless of race, color, or qualifications, if carried into practice, would end in the degradation of the white race and the speedy destruction of government. So that was the driving philosophy of the parties that were writing the, statewide platforms. We actually adopted a second constitution in 1879 that went so far to also explicitly bar any person who was a native of China from being an elector. So California lived with lifetime bars if you had ever been convicted of a felony for over 100 years. And voters had the opportunity in 1974 to change that through a proposition like the voters do today. And we ended up with the current construction. And so that is people who are currently in prison, serving a felony sentence, or on parole, which impacts people who leave state prison. So there's been several judicial decisions and many legislative actions that have clarified California's voting rights for people who are system impacted, as we've sought to reform our criminal justice laws, send less people to prison, and have people serve sentences in jails. We've gone about reflecting that our voting rights laws means that those communities have enfranchisement. So Prop 17 will take away one of the major prohibitions that people who are system impacted face and give people who have completed their prison term, who are back in their communities, working, caring for their children, the right to vote at the ballot box. So that's a little history of where we're at, how we got to where we are today, what we hope to do, because it's an amendment to our Constitution. It has to go to the voters. Many other states, their legislatures have been able to make this change, but we have to go to the voters and ask them to change that. So the legislature put it on the ballot, and now we're working to make sure that the voters understand what's at stake here. In the breakout section, my colleague Shay will talk about who this impacts today and how people who are directly impacted by this prohibition are leading the way on this, but I'll also give her a moment to see if there's anything she wants to add.
Thank you. I always love joining ACLU. They're such wonderful people and I love presenting with them. Yes, I just would add is that this is 57,112 people that are in our community, and 3/4 of that are Black and Latino. And as Maya has said, this was written to disenfranchise, to not give us political access or political voice. And as someone who's formerly incarcerated, I would tell you it's disabling sometimes to know that I can do all the other things that every one of you can enjoy, but I can't voice my opinion. I'm actually not on parole, so just let me be very clear. But my relatives, I come from a family that many of them have went to prison, and I'm part of this, school to pipeline, prison pipeline that we all are trying to dismantle. So I think this is just one step. It's this critical time. We see this, rising and standing up and marching in the street about our rights, the time is now for us to make change, and that is by giving people the right, because we can't have a democracy that serves us all if we don't include everyone in the decisions.
Thank you. Thank you, Shay, for closing us out with that. Yes, we need a full participation in our democracy. So at this point, Nina, my colleague Nina, will now put us into our breakout sessions, where we'll go in and have deeper discussions on each of the propositions. And then we'll see everyone back here in 20 minutes.
All right, I'm opening up the breakout rooms. All you have to do is click yes to join.
Back, everyone. So I hope you all had very fruitful discussions. I know our breakout was great. So with that, I'd like to invite our experts to share some of the key takeaways from each of the breakout sessions for the rest of the callers, really share out a little bit of some shared learning. And we'll go in reversed order this time and start with Prop 17. Shay, would you be able to start us off?
Yes, I would love to. And just by the way, we are not related. I know we're both Francos. I meant to say that earlier.
I know. I forgot to say that. No relation.
But she must be awesome. So, I mean, we had a great breakout session to really talk about Prop 17, you know, how it got on the ballot, where we at today, and what do we see the percentage or the possibility of it passing. Maya did a great recap of how I wasn't a part of ACA 6, I was a part of ACA 5, but during that time I was supporting them both, was to get, it was 2/3 bipartisan support to pass it through our state legislature. At the lead was Kevin McCarthy, our Assembly Member Kevin McCarthy, who got it on the ballot. Fast forward to the campaign, we have this amazing coalition of people that are impacted. You know, I think it's family impacted, or you know, just social justice, really want to change reform in that school to prison pipeline, mass incarceration. And that is, it was Initiate Justice that really pushed this forward, with Brennan Center for Law, ACLU, White People for Black Lives, Mi Familia Vota, League of Women Voters. I could go on. It's a scroll of people, and it's also been endorsed and supported by the governor and Lieutenant Governor Alex Padilla, Eric Swalwell, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, to name a few. I think that when it comes to Proposition 17, it's very simple. We are just righting the wrongs of the injustices, and it's taken a lot of people to recognize, especially people with lived experience, as Maya had said in the breakout rooms, is every day they're out there advocating through the legislature process, or right now currently in the community, that they are relying on all of us here today and all your friends and all your families and everyone who's eligible to vote in California to vote yes, because while they pay taxes, raise their families, they do everything that you and I enjoy and celebrate, except they don't have a say in who's going to be the person that represents their children's schools, or city council, state assembly, and Congress. And we all know, even though it's 57,112, and I want that number to stick with you, because I want, when you're voting and you tell your friends, I want you to know they're relying on you, is that they really need to be able to, elections have to be decided by a democracy that includes us all. It sort of reminds me of that, separate but equal. You can have everything and you have to reintegrate and you have to be successful, but we're going to take your civil liberties and not let you have a stake in anyone who represents you. So I don't know, I could go on forever about this as someone who, I'm not on parole, as I mentioned before, but I am formally incarcerated, and I could have had one decision from being on parole or being in prison. And so I know what it's like to go inside the jails and talk to the women and the men. And I want you to know that 10,000 of these people on parole are women. They're mothers. They are already facing, equity barriers, like 16. I mean, it's going to include more, because most 2/3 of the people that are on parole are Black, Brown, Indigenous, or API. So we have to think about that when we're voting on something like this, because you never think so much as a vote, like your voting rights, are ever being challenged until they are. So I would like to invite Maya, because we're a team, we're a powerful team of strong women. And I believe that I have one voice and perspective that brings to this movement, but there's always the other people that are legislative and creating the laws that really help us get to the next level.
I don't have anything to add. You did such a great job.
Dreamwork, teamwork. But yes, I just say that you share with your friends how important it is for people to have the right to vote. We take it for granted sometimes. And when I was on a call yesterday, someone said, it's so hurtful when someone says, oh, my vote doesn't matter, when I really want to vote and they won't vote. So I think that's the message that we have to get out. This vote, when we vote, it's not just about us. It's about everything that's happening in our cities, in our counties, in our state, and in our nation. So please vote yes on Prop 17. Scream it from the rooftops. And if you want an awesome toolkit that you can put on all your social medias, we definitely can provide that. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you so much, Shay and Maya. Appreciate dropping knowledge, and especially that perspective, right, of this is a proposition where the people who are most impacted cannot even vote on it, because that's what the proposition is trying to get, right? I'd love to hear from Jessie, if you can share about Prop 16 and the conversation you all had in your breakout.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So first, I just want to really appreciate the Women's Foundation for creating this space for us all to come together in this critical conversation. I will say, you know, these are all initiatives that I was all in for before, but the reality is this is a very difficult time, and getting to be able to have a conversation with women like you that are warriors in the field just refuels me for the next few weeks as we try to get these initiatives across the finish line. So thank you for that. So really quickly, you know, we had a great conversation. We probably could have gone on longer, but one big thing that came out of our Prop 16 conversation is that individuals in our breakout room were not aware that our effort to repeal the ban on affirmative action is facing a steeper uphill battle to passage than many had anticipated. Many thought that this was a slam dunk, and it is not a slam dunk. So I hope that you take away from this conversation that this is a racial reckoning issue. This is a racial equity issue, but this is also a gender equity issue. And that at the same time, we're uplifting that the presidential race is the most consequential race potentially in our history. We have the ability to create a more just California. And if we fail in our ability to pass a proposition that creates that more just California, shame on us, right? I think one of the things that people were also always surprised to hear is we are only one of 9 states in the nation that has banned affirmative action. What does that say about our progressive state of California that thinks we are the sunshine golden state that leads the way? And that at a time when we know that women are earning 80 cents on the dollar for our earnings compared to men. When women of color are earning 42 cents on the dollar, and single mothers like my mom was are earning 42 cents on the dollar. So we have a long way to go. But the other thing that I want to share with you, because I think people need to know this, is that some of the core ally groups that we thought would be in support of this are being divided by opposition that is intentionally creating racial division to ensure that Prop 16 fails. So we might have more money behind Prop 16, but what's happening is we have tried to, or others have tried to, divide our Asian American community, saying that they will have fewer, not more, opportunities in education and in business if Prop 16 passes. And they've tried to downplay the importance for our women across the state, and our Latinx community is being told that this is actually about legalizing discrimination. And so we heard from Leanne. I thought Leanne did a beautiful job of saying, how do we change that? Well, the unit of change is our young people, because our young people are more progressive, more open, and interested in creating the kind of California that they would want to raise their children and grandchildren in. And so we need to make sure that we disrupt this argument that it's legalizing discrimination. We need to make sure that we get out the word that everyone values an opportunity for their children to be able to go to college. And yet, when we banned affirmative action, fewer Black and Latinx students got into elite colleges and universities across the state. Fewer opportunities were created to be hired, to get contracts, right? We have a moral obligation to absolutely disrupt those inequities. And so there are many ways to get involved, but the Vote Yes on Prop16.org website is one place where you can get toolkits, share on your social media, create a sense of urgency with your networks, because this is an initiative that's about equal opportunity and justice. And if our networks aren't feeling the urgency of this to the core right now, especially with the murders that we have seen of our Black young men and women across the state and country, then when are they going to feel this urgency to ensure that affirmative action is lifted up as a way to create the kind of society we are proud to live in?
That gave me chills. Thank you so much, Jessie. So we all have our quote unquote marching orders. I don't know what it. And last but not least, we are going to ask Kayla to share about Prop 15.
Thanks so much, Marisol. It's going to be hard to follow that with some tax policy discussion. But I just want to leave you all with a few key points about the measure for you to take away, and then I'll let Clarissa or Jamise talk a little bit more about the campaign. You know, I'm from a California Budget and Policy Center, so we do independent analysis on policy issues affecting low and middle income Californians. So I think the biggest point to make about Prop 15 is that it gives voters the chance to reform an inequitable commercial property tax system that's deprived California's communities of revenues for over 4 decades since the enactment of Prop 13. The measure would raise $6.5 to $11.5 billion in new revenues each year, and that would provide schools, community colleges, cities, counties, and special districts with the resources they need to fund the services that all Californians rely on. So that's education, housing, healthcare, parks, and fire protection. It was mentioned, I think, during the opening remarks about Prop 15 that it's estimated that 92% of the revenue would come from only 10.5% of properties. And that's because there's these high value properties that are still paying taxes based on decades old purchase prices. So that creates these inequities because there are property owners that have recently purchased property that pay far higher bills. And the funding that would be raised by Prop 15, I think it's important to note that, you know, that goes straight into the community. An estimated 40% would be going to schools and community colleges, and the rest would be going to cities, counties, and special districts. The school funding, I think it's important to note that the new funds would not be able to replace any current school funding. This would be additional incremental dollars. And it would be distributed according to the local control funding formula, which is the state's equity-based formula for distributing funding, which provides a base grant per student and additional funding for English learners, foster youth, and students from low-income families. And it's been said before, but it bears repeating, it will not affect it will not affect homeowners or any kind of residential properties. So with that, I will hand it over to Clarissa to see if she has any closing remarks about the measure or the campaign. Thanks so much.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's beautiful to kind of round out the other 2 measures. I just want to thank everybody that presented on these measures. I learned so much today that I did not know, and also just really powerful testimony from both Shay and Jessie that makes me think about why I'm involved in this fight and why I do the work that I do, which is my son, who's 13 years old. We are sharing a kitchen right now as a classroom and a workspace, FYI. I do this. I am actually, you know, the parent of a 13-year-old public school student, right? Who has struggled to get childcare for my son in preschool. My son has gone to kindergarten twice, and my son was in a school classroom of kindergartners that had nearly 40 kids in it, right? He has been experimented on by with every curriculum and learning methodology you could ever think of, you could ever imagine. He's been suspended accidentally, right? My son has had such a challenging journey through a completely underfunded, disintegrating system of public education in Oakland, California. I could not even begin to tell you the injustice. Billions of dollars does not even begin to address the inequity that I have personally faced in my family. You cannot replace a life, right? You cannot replace the fact that someone missed out on many years of literacy instruction, math instruction. And I wanted to, just say really quickly that it's time to revive the whole entire pathway from, elementary school to college, and really thinking about our Black and brown youth, the people who inherit this country and this state after us, and the investment that is owed to our young people in this, not today, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now, for us to get it right, many of us don't have time to wait for the perfect policy and the perfect set of circumstances, right? My son's life is on the line today, right now. He walks to and from school. I worry about his safety with these police officers. He's been followed home from school twice. We want to talk about personal experience. I've gotten phone calls in the middle of the day, right? Because he is scared because he ran home after the police have followed him. There is a design that we are all speaking to, right? And we cannot change that and transform that design without the proper funding, the proper governance, and the proper protections, and a redefinition of what it means to be Black and thriving in this state, right? We cannot do that without that. And so some of us may have to sacrifice a little bit, but many of those that may have to sacrifice a little bit have the privilege to do so. My son does not. And that's kind of it. That's all I have to say. One last thing. The other thing that my organization, Parent Voices Oakland, is working on is around health equity. We know that Black infants are 3 times more likely to be stillborn or to die in the process of childbirth or shortly afterwards. So we know that there is a lot of conversation about Black maternal and Black infant health. In Alameda County, Black infants are 3 times more likely to die. And that is something that we will be campaigning around aggressively. It's known in our public health systems. And the thing that we continue to hear is we don't have the funding, right, to develop the infrastructure to intervene, interrupt, and address that level of disparity in our community. And so we need local services, whether they are environmental, educational, right, in the healthcare system, to begin to address at a very basic level. This is the bare minimum to address what is life and death for many of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Clarissa.
Sorry.
That
And
was
I
very
wanted to ask
powerful.
Jimmy's, sorry, if Jimmy's had anything she wanted to add after that, sorry.
No, I think you said it all, Clarissa. This is really about reversing decades of racialized disinvestment in our communities, and something that our communities have experienced for a long time, and even more urgent now in our current circumstances, right? Because of COVID, because of the fires, our cities, our school districts, our special districts, our counties are facing unprecedented budget shortfalls. And so we're talking about making cuts that are going to affect lives like Clarissa's son now, but also will have, just impact for decades in terms of setting our folks up and our kids up for the future. And so it becomes even more dire in these current circumstances that we make sure corporations pay their fair share toward the services that we all need, and make sure that we don't have to make those kinds of devastating cuts. So we talked about this a little bit in our small group, and I think Nicola said it really well. Family and friends are confused about this measure. They're seeing corporate backed commercials that are very confusing. And so it's critically important not only that all of us vote and encourage people to vote, but also talk openly about what this measure is actually about, and dispel some of those myths and lies that are out there so people have the correct information. They can make a decision based off of facts. And that's really important. So don't be afraid to have those conversations, and we'll be happy to provide any info you might need, talking points or whatever. So thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yeah, a lot of the propositions, the way that they, when there's big opposition, it's usually a disinformation campaign, right? And so that's leaving a lot of people confused. So that's why we're here. I don't know if there are any questions. I'll turn it over to Nina, who will help us moderate the chat. If there are any questions right now for any of our wonderful experts.
I don't see that there are any questions right now, but I'll just open space for any questions or last comments. Okay. So there is a question. Can we get a sense of how each of these propositions are doing?
Who would want to go first? Maybe we start with Prop 17 again.
Yeah, no, great, thank you.
Okay.
So we are actually, can you hear me? Okay, yeah, so you know what, I would have to say that we have this amazing coalition of people. I'm here with Maya right now from ACLU, who's been an amazing partner. I feel like we're doing really good. I mean, our messaging is going strong. We've reached a lot of people, but I'm also, I believe that the time is now. I'm listening to all of you, and look at the diversity just in this room and how many people we impact in our own communities. While maybe some people can't agree on 80%, in that 20%, I can find a place where we can meet on people's voting rights. And I've been able to have these conversations. Sometimes they're super uncomfortable, and it ends with a hug and saying, hey, we can't agree. But I just feel that because we have this robust coalition of organizations and the support, we started with 2/3 bipartisan support of the state legislature to get it on the ballot. Now 3/4 of the state legislature supports it. So it just really shows that there may be a small pocket of people who just naturally don't believe in rehabilitation, voting being a privilege in their minds. The majority of people are now saying now's the time. They've taken to the streets, the civil unrest is in their front doors, and the disenfranchisement that stems from Jim Crow has really shocked and rocked so many people. I feel that it's going to pass, and that's the first stage of getting the word out, and then take the next step. Democracy deserves us all. And everything +1 to 15 and 16 too. I'm a huge supporter. I'm screaming it from the rooftops, just so you know. The intersectionality is so real. Thank you, because of raising Black children, the experience, married to a police officer who has to also say, hey, you're Black in public, so this is how I need you to behave. And it's a mother's nightmare from here to the bus stop, from here to the store, from here to their kid's house. You don't want them to be a Trayvon or an Emmett. So it's like, then you added the discrimination in the education process, the pipeline to prison because there's no equity, and then 17, we take their rights. So it all really comes together, and I'm so glad to be on this panel with all of you amazing leaders who I hope to do more impactful work with. In the meanwhile, share from the rooftops, yes on 17, as well as 15 and 16.
Thank you, Shay, especially for connecting the dots. We're intersectional feminists, and this is what we do. In terms of how the other props are doing, would someone from Prop 16 care to share?
Leanne, you want to jump in on
I
this
guess
one?
it's more like polling.
I don't
Yes.
know if Leanne.
Jesse,
Leanne,
can you share the latest polling that you shared?
yes. So the latest polling has us at the high 30%, right? Which is not great. And so, I have not been talking about that. I mean, we're on an upward trajectory after the state television ads started airing and some more targeted social media. But this is going to be a real push. So, in terms of fundraising, we've out fundraised our opposition. But, at one point we were doing much better than we are now. We seemed like we had a better shot than even Prop 15, and we saw a dip, and it's hard to, attribute it to just one thing. But, the message I hope you take away from it is that we have some ground to make up. Ballots are being cast every day in California, we know, and so we have to get the word out. And I'm actually jumping off this call and going immediately to speak on a Prop 16 text banking call. So I dropped in the chat box a Vote Yes on Prop16.org website that has toolkits that you can share, has opportunities to text bank and volunteer. We are doing a lot with the peer-to-peer texting from the comfort of your own home, on your own cell phone, reaching out to voters, letting them know what's at stake. So please consider taking a few hours to, reach out to voters and let them know that Prop 16 is critical to creating the kind of future California that we want to live in.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate that. And then for Prop 15.
That would definitely be doing.
Yeah, we've got some good polling. So an internal poll that we did back in August through September 1st showed 54% support. PPIC did a poll in April that showed 53% support, which was a 7-point increase over their last poll. And then their most recent September poll showed 51%. Berkeley IGS did a poll on September 23rd, I think, and it had us in a 15-point lead over the opposition at 49-34, but 17% undecided. So we know these polls they're decent indicators, but they also, they just survey like likely wealthier, older voters. And so we've been building a base for 10 years across the state to really turn out young people and renters and, folks who are less likely to vote and don't get polled. So we're counting on those folks to push us over the edge of 50% plus one. So really, turnout will be very, very important. But I think, a lot of these polls show one, steady support despite the pandemic, which is really huge because the opposition's messaging has been around, we can't do this now, which they never want us to do it, but, apparently now we also can't do it. And so shows, steady support despite the pandemic. And also a significant lead over the opposition, right? Even though it's still polling in that kind of scary margin, it's over the opposition by a significant margin. So that's really positive as well. And all the more reason why we need to turn out, the voters who are not represented in these polls, but we know are represented when decisions are made, like Prop 15, 16, and 17, right? And who will be the most impacted. So that will be very important.
And for Prop 17, it's currently polling around the low 60s.
Thanks, Maya. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, I'm sorry, folks, I have to go. I have to jump on another call that's at 5:20. So it was good to be with you. My email's in the chat.
Yay, nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. We'll share some info out as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Seeing no other last thoughts or questions, I can pass it back to Serena to close us out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marisol, and especially thank you so much to all of our speakers for spending this time with us and continuing to educate us more deeply, and to all of you who joined us today. We really appreciate having this time together, and none of this, of course, would have been possible without the Women's Foundation California staff, who has worked on all the logistics, the content, came up with the idea. And this is the first time in a while that we have been able, as I said at the top of the call, to have the capacity to really take a position on ballot initiatives and to bring our feminist principles to those positions. So, you know, as you've heard, there's a lot at stake on the ballot this year, and I'm just so grateful that by coming together, we can move towards a more just California. And so it's going to be each of our jobs on this call today to take what we have learned and share it with our communities so we can build support for the propositions that you heard about. And as a reminder, Women's Foundation California's feminist ballot guide includes information on 5 propositions: 15, 16, 17, 20, and 25. And so we really hope that this discussion underscored the importance of the state policies in advancing racial, economic, and gender justice, and really encourages everyone to fill out their ballot. I know that everybody on this call will fill out their ballot. I have 100% confidence in that. So, you know, as I said, we've got to make sure that we're getting out the vote in our families and communities, make sure they're signing the envelopes and returning it as soon as possible to ensure that our voices are heard. And before we close, I just want to say, you know, in addition to the speakers and our staff, and you know, there's so many supporters of all of this work, whether it's donations directly to the Women's Foundation or specifically to the ballot initiative campaigns or to the organizations directly. We value that. We've got to do more funding for a just California. And I'm just really want to say a thank you to, I think so many people on this call have contributed more than $2 million to our Relief and Resilience Fund. And that we have immediately gotten out into the community to 180 organizations since April, which is more than we have done in any you know, annual time period since I have been involved with the foundation, which goes back to 2004. And I'm pretty confident I can say in our entire history. So there's a real spirit of generosity in California, certainly amongst our donor community. And I want to encourage you all to continue giving generously directly to organizations. I was on a call earlier today in preparation for the forum on KQED, which we'll be on Friday. And they said, you know, what can we tell our listeners to do? And I said, we have 180 organizations on our website. They can give directly to those organizations, or they can give through us so that we can get the money out. We are so privileged to have been able to support in various ways our WPI Women's Policy Institute fellows. Jessie is an alum, Clarissa is an alum, and our grant partners. And so we want to just make sure that we can continue to do that. And to do that, you know, I just want to express our gratitude to our donor community, without which none of this would be happening. So thank you again for joining us. A lot is going to happen in the next few weeks. I'm not taking anything for granted this year. We are doing scenario planning here at the foundation. I was taken by surprise in 2016, and this year, no matter how good the polls are looking, anything can happen in the next 3 weeks. So the most important thing is that we are in community with each other, and whatever happens, we will always be in community with each other. We will organize, we will support and care for each other. And so that is really the greatest privilege for me, to be here at the Women's Foundation California during this moment, and being able to support these incredible movement leaders. So thank you so much. We will be scheduling a post-election debrief, so please be on the lookout for an invitation as we anticipate there will be a lot to talk about no matter what the results of the election, good or bad. There's going to be tons of work to do. So thank you again. Please stay safe and take good care, everybody.